She was only 9 years old when she started carrying water that weighed more than her hope. Walking alone through Comanche territory every dawn, while her mother lay dying in a cabin that smelled of fevered sweat and fading dreams. And on the morning, a shadow detached itself from the mesquite trees and followed her home. Lucinda's world split open between fear and something she couldn't yet name. Something that looked like salvation, wearing war paint and watching her with eyes that had seen too much death to ignore one more. The bucket was iron, and iron didn't care that Lucinda's hands were small or that blisters had opened, and healed and opened again across her palms until they'd formed permanent ridges of scar tissue that would mark her for the rest of her life. September 1867, and the Texas plains stretched endless and indifferent under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, the kind of blue that promised nothing and took everything. Lucinda woke before the sun, same as always, because the fever made Mama thirsty, and the thirst never slept. The cabin was one room, rough-hewn pine, that Papa had built 3 years before the horse kicked him in the head and left him talking strange for 2 days before he stopped talking at all. That was 18 months ago. Mama had held together through winter, through spring, through the loneliest summer Lucinda had ever known. But when August came with its heat that made the air shimmer like water, Mama took to bed, and the coughing started. Doc Thornhill from Red Creek came once, charged $2 they didn't have, and said it was lung fever. He said pray. He said sometimes prayer wasn't enough. Then he left and didn't come back. Lucinda pushed the threadbare quilt aside and stood on the packed dirt floor. Cold seeped up through her bare feet. September mornings in Texas hill country playing tricks, hot by noon but cold enough at dawn to see your breath. She pulled on her dress, the brown one with the patches at the elbows, the only one she owned that still fit. Her shoes sat by the door, leather so worn the soles were more whole than solid, but she'd stuff them with cotton wadding later. No sense wearing them out walking to the spring. Mama's breathing rattled from the corner where the bed stood. Lucinda paused, listening for the pattern. 3 shallow breaths, 1 deep, a cough that sounded wet and wrong, then 3 more shallow. Still alive, still fighting. Lucinda had learned to measure life in breath patterns, the way sailors measure storms, by wave height. She picked up the bucket. The handle was smooth from use, worn by Papa's hands first, then hers. It felt heavier every morning, though she knew that was impossible. Iron didn't gain weight. Only children did, and she hadn't gained an ounce since Papa died. The door creaked when she opened it. She'd been meaning to grease the hinges with animal fat. But there hadn't been any animal fat since they ate the last chicken in July. Outside, darkness still held the world, but the eastern horizon showed gray. That particular shade that meant sunrise was coming whether you were ready or not. The well was 300 yards from the cabin, across open ground dotted with mesquite and prickly pear, and every step of those 300 yards took Lucinda farther from safety and deeper into country, where Comanche raiders moved like smoke and disappeared like morning mist. She'd been doing this walk for 6 weeks now, ever since Mama couldn't do it herself. 42 mornings of walking alone, with iron in her hands and fear in her throat. The Johansons lived 2 miles east. But they'd made it clear after Papa died that charity had limits, and those limits didn't extend to the widow of a man who'd had the poor judgment to buy land this far from town. The McGraws were 3 miles west, and they'd stopped speaking to Mama altogether after Mama refused to sell them the water rights to the spring. That spring was all they had. Without it, they'd die of thirst before the fever finished what it started. Lucinda walked. The ground was hard, baked by summer sun, and cracked in patterns that looked like broken pottery. Grasshoppers burst from under her feet, their wings making that dry rattle that sounded like bones shaking in a box. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped, and another answered. Predators talking to each other in a language of hunger. She gripped the bucket handle tighter. Her hands ached before she'd gone 50 yards. The spring sat in a depression between 2 limestone hills, fed by an underground source that never ran dry even in drought years. That's why Papa had bought this land. Water meant life, he'd said. Water meant future. But Papa was dead, and the future looked like a 9-year-old girl, carrying more weight than any child should carry. So maybe he'd been wrong about futures. Maybe water just meant one more day of not dying yet. She reached the spring as the first real light broke over the hills. The water was clear, cold, pooling in a natural basin that Papa had lined with rocks to keep the mud out. Lucinda knelt, set the bucket down, and for just a moment let herself be still. Birds were starting to sing, sparrows mostly, and the occasional cardinal flashing red against the grey scrub. This was the only time of day she felt something like peace, here at the spring with the water whispering over stone and the world not yet fully awake. Then she heard the horse. Not close, not yet, but somewhere behind her to the north, the distinct sound of hoofbeats on hard ground. Lucinda froze. Her heart kicked against her ribs like something trying to escape. The nearest settlement was 8 miles south. Nobody from Red Creek came out this way anymore, not since the Comanche raids started up again last spring. The army said they'd push the tribes west, but the army lied the way politicians lied, with confidence and no regard for truth. She turned slowly, still kneeling, and saw him. He sat on a paint horse at the top of the northern rise, maybe 100 yards distant, silhouetted against the rising sun so she couldn't make out features. Only shape, tall, broad-shouldered, long dark hair hanging loose past his shoulders. He wore no hat. Even from this distance, even in the tricky light, Lucinda knew what she was seeing. Comanche. Warrior. Death. Probably, though maybe death would be quicker than fever. Her first instinct was to run. Her second was to freeze. She did neither. Instead, she dipped the bucket into the spring and filled it. Movement slow and deliberate, because animals could sense fear, and men were just animals with better weapons. The water was cold enough to make her fingers ache. She filled the bucket 3/4 full, as much as she could carry without spilling, then stood. The bucket seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. The rider hadn't moved. He sat his horse like he was part of it, like they'd grown together from the same piece of earth. Lucinda couldn't see his face, but she felt his eyes. Felt them measuring her, weighing her, deciding something she didn't understand. She wanted to scream, wanted to drop the bucket and run back to Mama and bar the door and pretend safety existed behind pine walls. But Mama needed water. Mama needed her. So Lucinda lifted the bucket, felt her shoulders scream in protest, and started walking back toward the cabin. She didn't look at the rider again. Didn't dare. She kept her eyes on the ground in front of her feet, watching for holes that could turn an ankle, counting steps because counting helped. 1, 2, 3, 50, 100. The bucket's weight dragged at her arms, pulled her shoulders down, made her back hurt. Water sloshed over the rim and soaked her dress. She kept walking. At 200 steps, she heard the horse again. Closer now, following, not fast, not charging, just following at a distance like a wolf trailing wounded prey. Lucinda's breath came short and sharp. She wanted to look back, wanted to see how close he was. But looking back meant showing fear, and showing fear meant becoming prey in truth, instead of just feeling like it. She reached the cabin with her arms shaking, and her dress soaked, and her heart beating so hard she thought it might tear through her chest and run away without her. The door was still open, the way she'd left it. Inside, Mama's breathing still rattled in that terrible pattern. 3 shallow, 1 deep, cough, repeat. Lucinda stepped through the door, set the bucket down, and only then, only when she was inside with walls around her, did she turn to look. He was there, 50 yards from the cabin, sitting absolutely still on that paint horse, watching. In full light, she could see him clearly now, maybe 30 years old, though it was hard to tell with the life these men lived, life that aged you fast or killed you young. His face was copper-dark, strong-featured, with black eyes that gave away nothing. He wore buckskin leggings, a leather vest over bare chest, and his hair hung in 2 long braids wrapped with strips of red cloth. No war paint, no weapons visible, though she knew they were there, hidden under leather or tucked into moccasin boots. They looked at each other across 50 yards of Texas dirt. Lucinda gripped the doorframe. Her legs shook. She thought about Papa's rifle, the old Springfield musket that hung over the hearth, but she'd never fired it and wouldn't know how to load it fast enough to matter. The Comanche could cross 50 yards in seconds if he wanted to. Could kill her, kill Mama, take whatever he wanted and leave nothing but silence. But he didn't move. Just sat there watching, face empty of expression, but eyes full of something she couldn't name. Not anger, not hunger, something else. Something that made her chest hurt in a different way than fear. Then slowly he raised one hand, not threatening, not reaching for a weapon, just raising his hand, palm out, in what might have been greeting or might have been promise or might have been something that didn't have a name in English. Lucinda couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The Comanche held her gaze for another long moment, then he lowered his hand, turned his horse, and rode back toward the northern hills. He didn't hurry, didn't look back, just rode away as if the encounter had settled something that needed settling. Lucinda stood in the doorway until he disappeared over the rise. Then she closed the door, dropped the bar across it, and slid down to sit on the floor with her back against the wood. Her whole body shook. She pressed her hands over her mouth to keep from crying, because crying wouldn't help and it would wake Mama, and Mama had enough worries without adding Comanche warriors to the list. "Lucy?" Mama's voice came weak from the bed. "That you, baby?" Lucinda stood, wiped her face, and forced her voice steady. "Yes, Mama, got the water. You need a drink?" "Please." Lucinda dipped the tin cup into the bucket and carried it to the bed. Mama looked worse than yesterday. Her face was grey, except for 2 bright spots of fever on her cheeks. Her hair, once thick and dark, lay lank and sweat-dampened on the pillow Papa had stuffed with goose down in better days. She was 32 years old and looked 60. Lucinda helped her sit up enough to drink. Mama's hand shook so badly she had to hold the cup herself. After 3 small sips, she lay back down, exhausted by the effort. "You're a good girl," she whispered. "Best girl. Don't know what I'd do without you. Rest now. Mama, I'll make some broth later if you can keep it down." But Mama was already asleep, or unconscious. Lucinda could never quite tell which anymore. Lucinda sat beside the bed and stared at nothing. Her dress was still wet from spilled water. Her hands still shook. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and the day grew hot, and somewhere in the hills a Comanche warrior sat on a paint horse and knew exactly where they lived and exactly how helpless they were. She didn't tell Mama about him. What good would it do? Mama couldn't protect her. Couldn't even protect herself. All it would do was add worry to dying, and dying was hard enough without extra weight. That night, Lucinda lay on her pallet near the hearth and didn't sleep. Every sound outside made her jump. The wind in the mesquite, an owl calling, the distant yip of coyotes. She kept seeing those black eyes watching her, kept feeling the weight of that gaze. Part of her expected him to come back in the darkness, to kick in the door and finish what he'd started by following her home. But the door stayed closed. The night passed. And when dawn came grey and cold, Lucinda picked up the iron bucket and walked back to the spring because Mama needed water, and needing didn't stop just because you were afraid. He was there again. Same spot, same horse, same absolute stillness, watching her walk across the open ground with iron in her hands and fear in her throat. This time Lucinda didn't freeze. She kept walking, kept her eyes forward, filled her bucket while her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. When she stood and turned back toward the cabin, he was closer. Not threatening closer, just closer. Maybe 70 yards now instead of 100. She walked home with water sloshing over the rim and soaking her dress. Walked with her back exposed and her shoulders tight, waiting for the arrow that would end her story before it properly began. But no arrow came, just the sound of hoofbeats following at a distance like yesterday. Like a ritual, neither of them understood, but both were bound to complete. At the cabin, she turned and looked again. He sat 50 yards out, same as before. This time he didn't raise his hand. Just watched, waited, then turned and rode away. 3rd morning, same thing. 4th morning, same thing. By the 5th morning, Lucinda realized the fear had changed shape. It was still there, still sharp, but underneath it was something else. Curiosity, maybe. or the beginning of understanding that if he wanted to kill them, he'd have done it by now. Comanche warriors didn't waste 5 days watching a dying woman and a helpless child. They struck fast and disappeared faster. On the 6th morning, Lucinda did something reckless. When she finished filling her bucket and turned to walk home, she stopped, stood there in full view with water dripping from iron and her heart hammering, and she looked directly at him. Not challenging, not defiant, just looking, the way he'd been looking at her for 6 days straight. He sat on his horse 70 yards distant. For a long moment neither moved. Then the Comanche did something unexpected. He dismounted, moved slow and deliberate, hands visible, no weapons drawn. He walked his horse forward maybe 20 yards, then stopped. He knelt in the dirt, and with one finger he drew something in the dust. Lucinda couldn't see what he drew from where she stood. Couldn't tell if it was threat or promise or message. But she understood the gesture. He was showing her he could be on the ground, vulnerable, unarmed. He was showing her that whatever this was, it wasn't war. She didn't approach. Wasn't that brave or that foolish? But she nodded. Just once, a bare dip of her chin that acknowledged the gesture even if she didn't understand it. Then she picked up her bucket and walked home, while he watched from his knees in the dust like a man at prayer. That evening, Mama had a good hour. The fever broke temporarily and her eyes cleared, and she actually sat up without help. "Tell me something good, Lucy," she said. "Tell me something about your day." Lucinda almost told her then, almost said, "There's a Comanche warrior who follows me to the spring every morning, and I don't think he means harm, and I don't understand why, but I'm not as afraid as I should be." But the words stuck in her throat, trapped between truth and protection, so instead she said, "I saw 3 cardinals today." "Papa always said cardinals were good luck." Mama smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "Your papa was full of stories. Some of them were even true." She reached out and touched Lucinda's face, fingers light as moth wings. "You're growing up without me seeing it. When did you get so strong?" "I'm not strong, Mama. You're the strongest person I know." Mama's eyes drifted closed. "Stronger than me. Stronger than your papa was. You're going to be fine, baby. Even when I'm gone, you're going to be fine." "Don't talk like that." But Mama was already asleep again, and the good hour was over. On the 7th morning, Lucinda woke to find something on the cabin doorstep. A rabbit, freshly killed and cleaned, hung from a leather cord looped over the door latch. The meat was still warm. She stood in the doorway with dawn breaking behind her and stared at this impossible thing. This gift that couldn't be a gift because Comanche warriors didn't leave gifts for white settlers. They left bodies and burned cabins and silence, but the rabbit was real. The meat was good. And when Lucinda walked to the spring that morning with the iron bucket and her questions, he was there on his horse, watching from his usual distance. She stopped halfway to the spring, turned to face him fully, and for the first time in 7 days, she spoke. "Thank you." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, but it carried across the morning air. "For the rabbit." "Thank you." The Comanche didn't respond, didn't move. But something in his posture shifted, just slightly, like a door opening in a house that had been locked for years. Lucinda filled her bucket. When she turned to leave, he was gone, vanished into the mesquite like he'd never been there at all. But the rabbit had been real. The meat would feed them for 2 days. And somewhere in the hills, a Comanche warrior who should have been an enemy was watching over a dying woman and her daughter for reasons neither of them could name. Reasons that looked like Mercy wearing war paint and riding a paint horse through the last days of a world that was ending whether they wanted it to or not. The rabbit lasted 3 days, and in those 3 days, Mama's fever broke twice. Long enough for her to sit up and take real food. Thin broth made from the meat and wild onions Lucinda found growing near the creek bed. On the 3rd day, Mama even walked to the door, leaned against the frame and looked out at the land Papa had died for. "It's beautiful," she said, voice threadbare but present. "I forget sometimes how beautiful it is." Then the fever came back and she returned to bed and didn't get up again. Lucinda found the 2nd gift on the 9th morning. Not at the cabin this time, but at the spring itself. A leather water bag. Comanche made, decorated with beadwork in patterns of red and black and white. It hung from a mesquite branch near where she always knelt to fill the bucket. Inside the bag was something wrapped in soft deerskin. Lucinda's hands shook as she unwrapped it. Pemmican, dried meat mixed with berries and fat, the kind of food that could keep a person alive through hard winters. Enough for a week, maybe more if she was careful. She looked around, but the hills were empty. No rider, no paint horse, just the wind moving through the grass and the morning sun climbing over the eastern rise. "I don't understand," she said aloud to the air, to whoever might be listening. "Why are you doing this?" The wind didn't answer. It never did. But when she walked back to the cabin with the water bag slung over her shoulder and the pemmican wrapped carefully in her pocket, she felt less alone than she had in months. That afternoon, Mrs. Johansson came by, first visitor they'd had since Doc Thornhill's useless house call in August. She arrived in a wagon driven by her eldest son, Thomas, a boy of 16 with his father's hard eyes and his mother's pinched mouth. Mrs. Johansson was a severe woman, tall and thin as a fence post, dressed in black despite the heat. She knocked twice, sharp raps that sounded like judgment, and didn't wait for invitation before pushing the door open. "Mary," she said, looking at Mama in the bed. Not "Mary, how are you?" or "Mary, I've come to help." Just Mary, flat as a statement of fact. Mama's eyes opened. She looked at Mrs. Johansson with something that might have been hope or might have been resignation. "Constance," she managed, "good of you to come." "I came because it's my Christian duty." Mrs. Johansson's gaze swept the cabin, taking in the bare shelves, the empty corners, the poverty that hung in the air like smoke. "I can see you're in a bad way. The child looks half-starved." "We're managing," Mama said, but her voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Johansson turned to Lucinda, who stood by the hearth trying to make herself invisible. "Girl, go outside with Thomas. Adults need to talk." Lucinda looked at Mama, who nodded weakly. Outside, Thomas leaned against the wagon, whittling a piece of wood with a knife that looked too sharp for its purpose. He didn't look at Lucinda. "Ma says your mama's dying," he said, casual as talking about weather. "Says you'll be an orphan soon. Says you'll have to go to the church home in San Antonio." Lucinda's throat tightened. "Mama's not dying. Everybody dies. Some just take longer about it." He flicked a wood shaving at her feet. "You ever seen a church home? My cousin got sent to one after his folks died. Said they make you work all day and pray all night, and if you complain they lock you in the root cellar with the rats." "You're lying," Thomas shrugged. "Believe what you want. Won't change what's coming." He went back to whittling, and Lucinda went back to feeling like the ground was falling away beneath her feet. Inside the cabin, Mrs. Johansson's voice carried through the thin walls. "You need to think about the child's future, Mary. You can't care for her." "You can barely care for yourself." "The decent thing would be to make arrangements now, before it's too late. My sister in Red Creek runs a respectable household. She could use help with the younger children. Lucinda could learn proper skills, proper values. She'd be a servant," Mama said, and even weak with fever, her voice had steel in it. "You're asking me to sell my daughter. I'm asking you to be practical. What happens when you're gone? She's 9 years old, alone on this property. You think she'll last a week? The Comanche will take her, or worse." Mrs. Johansson's voice dropped, turned almost kind, which somehow made it more terrible. "There are fates worse than servitude, Mary. You know that. This land isn't safe. It never was. Your husband's stubbornness brought you this misery, and now your stubbornness will pass it to your daughter. Get out." Mama's voice was stronger than it had been in days. "Get out of my home. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to take my child and steal my land. The spring is worth money and everybody knows it. Get out, Constance. Get out and don't come back." Mrs. Johansson left in a rustle of black skirts and righteousness. Thomas climbed onto the wagon without a word, and they rolled away, trailing dust and judgment. Lucinda went back inside to find Mama crying, silent tears running down her fever-bright cheeks. "I'm sorry, baby," Mama whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have sold this place when your papa died. Should have taken you somewhere safe. This is safe, Mama. This is home. Home is just a word for a place that hurts you slow instead of fast. Mama reached for Lucinda's hand. Promise me something. When I'm gone, if things get bad, really bad, you run. You don't stay here out of stubbornness or pride. You run and you find people who'll help you, even if they're not the people I'd choose. Promise me, Lucinda promised, but she didn't mean it. She wouldn't run, wouldn't leave the only home she'd ever known, wouldn't give Mrs. Johansson or anyone else the satisfaction. The gifts continued. On the 11th morning, a bundle of herbs hung from the mesquite branch. Plants Lucinda recognized from when Mama used to gather medicine, sage and yarrow, and something with small purple flowers she didn't have a name for. On the 13th morning, a clay jar filled with honey, sealed with wax and still warm like it had been made that very day. On the 15th morning, 3 turkey feathers, each one perfect, tied together with sinew. Lucinda never saw him leave the gifts. She'd look around, search the hills, but he was never close when the gifts appeared. Only later, always later, she'd see him on his paint horse at the usual distance, watching. She started leaving things in return. Nothing valuable, because they had nothing valuable, but things that meant something. A smooth white stone from the creek, a piece of red cloth torn from her old dress, a wooden button Papa had carved, small trades between strangers, a language neither spoke but both understood. On the 18th morning, everything changed. Lucinda woke to the sound of horses, multiple horses, and men's voices rough with early morning and bad intentions. She grabbed Papa's rifle before she fully understood what she was doing, her hands remembering what her mind hadn't learned. Outside, 4 men sat mounted in the pre-dawn darkness. Not Comanche. White men, but somehow more dangerous because she knew their kind. Drifters, the sort who'd fought in the war and come out of it broken. Men who'd forgotten how to live in civilization and couldn't quite commit to living outside it. The leader was a thick-built man with a beard that looked like it housed small animals. He saw Lucinda in the doorway with the rifle and laughed, an ugly sound. Well now, little girl's got teeth. Where's your mama, child? Sleeping. You need to leave. We need to leave, the man repeated, mocking her accent. You hear that, boys? Little girl's giving us orders. The other 3 laughed. One of them, younger than the others with a scar across his cheek, had eyes that made Lucinda's skin crawl. Pretty little thing, he said. Shame to waste her out here. The bearded man held up a hand. We're just looking for water and maybe a meal. That spring on this property, we hear it's good water. Clear and cold. The spring's ours. You can't have it. Can't is a strong word for a child to use with grown men. The bearded man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Your mama in there, you said? Maybe we should talk to her instead. Maybe she's more reasonable than you. Lucinda raised the rifle. It was heavier than she expected, and she had no idea if it was even loaded. But she raised it anyway. Leave, now! The man with the scar reached for his pistol. The bearded man stopped him with a look, but his smile was gone now. You threatening us, girl? I'm protecting my home. Your home. The bearded man spat into the dirt. This ain't your home. This is Comanche country. You're just squatting here until they decide to take it back. We're doing you a favor, offering to use your spring peaceful-like. Otherwise, we just take it, and you, and anything else we want. The arrow came out of nowhere. 1 second the bearded man was talking, the next second an arrow sprouted from the ground between his horse's front hooves. The horse screamed and reared. The man cursed and fought for control. His companions drew weapons, but there was nothing to shoot at. The hills were empty. Dawn light showed nothing but grass and stone and shadow. Then he appeared. The Comanche warrior Nako, though Lucinda didn't know his name yet. He rode out of the sunrise, his paint horse moving fast, and he had a bow in his hands with another arrow already nocked. He didn't aim at the men, didn't need to. The threat was clear. 4 white men with guns, 1 Comanche with a bow. But the Comanche had high ground and surprise, and the absolute stillness of someone who'd killed before and would kill again without hesitation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jesus, one of the drifters said. Comanche. The bearded man got his horse under control. He looked at Nako, then at Lucinda, then back at Nako. Calculation moved behind his eyes, weighing profit against risk. The risk won. This ain't worth dying over, he said. Let's go, boys. The man with the scar didn't want to go. We outnumber him 4-1, and he's got 6 more arrows and probably a rifle, and definitely friends in those hills. We leave. The bearded man pulled his horse around. But we'll remember this place. We'll remember there's good water here and a sick woman and a little girl with no protection except a savage who might not be around next time. They rode south, back toward Red Creek, and Lucinda stood in the doorway, shaking so hard she thought her bones might rattle apart. The rifle slipped from her hands and hit the dirt. She couldn't breathe right, couldn't think right. Behind her, Mama called weakly, "Lucy, what's happening?" "Nothing, Mama, just some men passing through." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was the moment Lucinda understood that the world wanted to take this place from them, wanted to take everything, and the only thing standing between them and complete destruction was a Comanche warrior who shouldn't care if they lived or died. She looked up at the rise where Nako sat on his horse. He was closer now than he'd ever been, maybe 40 yards, close enough that she could see his face clearly in the growing light. He was younger than she'd thought, probably not even 30, with strong features and those black eyes that seemed to see through flesh to whatever lived underneath. He looked at her for a long moment, and she looked back, and something passed between them that had no words and needed none. Then he did something unexpected. He dismounted, ground-tied his horse, and walked toward the cabin. Not fast, not threatening, just walking like a man approaching a neighbor's house. Lucinda's breath caught. Every instinct screamed at her to run inside and bar the door, but her feet wouldn't move. He stopped 10 feet from the door, close enough that she could see the scars on his chest, the calluses on his hands, the way his hair was starting to come loose from its braids. He reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled something out. A root, thick and pale, dirt still clinging to it. He held it out to her. "For the sick woman," he said. His English was accented but clear. "Boil it, make her drink. It helps with fever." Lucinda's mind went blank. She'd expected violence or silence, not medicine, not kindness in a language she understood. "You speak English?" she managed. "I speak many languages." He took a step closer, still holding out the root. "Take it, your mother is dying. This will help? Why?" The word came out raw. "Why are you helping us?" Nako was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "I had a daughter once. She would be your age now. She died of fever 3 winters ago. My wife died with her." He met Lucinda's eyes. "I could not save them. Maybe I can save you." Lucinda took the root. Her hands brushed his, and she felt the warmth of living skin, human skin. Not monster or savage, but just a man who'd lost everything and found something worth protecting in a 9-year-old girl carrying water alone. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know your name, Nako. I'm Lucinda, Lucy." "Lucy." He said it carefully, like testing the weight of a new word. "You are brave, Lucy, braver than many warriors I have known. But brave does not mean safe. Those men will come back, or others like them. This land is hungry. It eats the weak. We're not weak. No, you are not weak. But you are alone, and alone is another kind of weakness." He looked past her into the cabin, where Mama's coughing could be heard even from outside. "I will watch. I will keep the enemies away. But you must be ready to fight too. Can you shoot that rifle?" Lucinda looked at the gun lying in the dirt. "I don't know. I never tried. Then learn. A weapon you cannot use is worse than no weapon at all." He turned to leave, then paused. "Boil the root until the water turns brown. Give her half a cup 3 times a day. It tastes bad. She will complain. Make her drink it anyway." He walked back to his horse, mounted in one fluid motion, and rode back toward the northern hills. Lucinda stood in the doorway, holding the root and watching him disappear into the landscape like he was part of it, born from stone and grass and sky. Inside, Mama called again, weaker this time. Lucinda went in, closed the door, and for the first time in weeks allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't die alone after all. She boiled the root that afternoon. The smell was sharp, almost bitter, like wet earth and something darker. Mama took one sip and made a face that would have been funny in better circumstances. "That's poison," she said. "It's medicine. The Comanche warrior gave it to me." Mama's eyes went wide. "What Comanche warrior?" So Lucinda told her everything. The weeks of watching, the gifts, the arrow that saved them from the drifters, Nako's face and voice, and the daughter he'd lost. Mama listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through fear and disbelief, and finally something that looked like understanding. "He lost a child," she said when Lucinda finished. "That changes a man. Changes what he can walk past and what he can't. Are you angry I didn't tell you?" "No, baby. I'm grateful." Mama took another sip of the medicine, grimaced but swallowed. "I'm grateful someone's watching over you when I can't." That night, Lucinda dreamed of arrows and paint horses and a girl who looked like her but wasn't. A Comanche girl with black hair and copper skin, who smiled at her from across a fire that never went out. In the dream, the girl said, "You are my sister now. Sisters protect each other. Sisters do not let each other die alone." When Lucinda woke, dawn was breaking and the iron bucket sat by the door, waiting for hands too small to carry it but strong enough to try. She walked to the spring that morning with the medicine root in her pocket and hope, fragile as bird bones but real, in her chest. Nako was there on his rise, watching as always. But this time, when she raised her hand in greeting, he raised his in return. It was a small gesture. It meant everything. It meant that in a world designed to break them both, they'd found something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth staying alive another day to see. The water was cold and clear. The sun climbed higher, and somewhere in the hills, a Comanche warrior sat on a paint horse and made a promise to ghosts that this time, this one time, he would not fail. This time the little girl would live. This time Mercy would wear war paint and carry arrows instead of flowers. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The medicine worked, not miraculously. Not like the stories where dying women rise from their beds transformed, but slowly, stubbornly, the way spring comes to hard ground. By the end of the first week, Mama's fever broke and stayed broken for 2 full days. By the end of the second week, she could sit up without help and eat more than broth. By the 3rd week, she walked to the door and back without collapsing. And Lucinda caught her crying quietly, not from pain, but from relief so profound it had nowhere to go but out through tears. October arrived with cooler nights, and the first hint that summer's cruelty might eventually end. The mesquite trees started dropping their bean pods, and Lucinda gathered them in her apron, enough to grind into flour if they got desperate. The spring ran clear and cold, and every morning she made the walk with her iron bucket. And every morning Nako was there on the northern rise, a constant as reliable as sunrise. They didn't speak often. Sometimes days passed with nothing but a raised hand between them. But the silence felt comfortable now, like an old coat worn soft with use. One morning she found him closer than usual, maybe 20 yards from the spring, examining something on the ground. When she approached, he looked up. "Tracks," he said, pointing. 3 horses, maybe 4. They came in the night, circled your cabin, then went south. His face was grim. "The men from before. They are watching, planning." Lucinda's stomach tightened. "Will they come back?" "Yes. Men like that always come back. They think about the water, about what they can take. They are patient now, but patience ends." He stood, brushed dirt from his hands. "You need to learn to shoot. Today, Mama needs me. Your mother needs you alive." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Get the rifle. Meet me at the flat rock past the eastern hill. When the sun is here." He held his hand at an angle, indicating late morning. "I will teach you." Lucinda told Mama she was going to gather firewood, which was technically true, since she planned to gather wood on the way back. Mama was having a good day, strong enough to protest. "You shouldn't go far alone." "I won't be alone." Lucinda said it without thinking, then realized what she'd revealed. Mama's eyebrows rose, but she didn't argue. Maybe she understood that arguing with necessity was like arguing with winter. Both came whether you wanted them or not. "Be careful," was all she said. "And be back before dark." Lucinda took Papa's Springfield rifle, heavy and awkward in her arms, and walked east toward the hills. The flat rock was a limestone shelf that jutted from the hillside, overlooking a small canyon where wind had carved the stone into strange shapes. Nako was already there, his paint horse grazing nearby. He'd brought his own rifle, a newer model than Papa's, probably taken in a raid or traded from some desperate settler. "You hold it wrong," he said when she climbed up to the rock. "Like it is a snake that might bite you. The rifle is not your enemy. It is a tool like a knife or an axe. Respect it, but do not fear it." He showed her how to position her hands, how to brace the stock against her shoulder, how to sight along the barrel. His hands were patient, adjusting her grip, and Lucinda noticed the scars on his forearms, pale lines against copper skin. Marks from a life lived hard and violent. "The Springfield is old but reliable," Nako said. "Your father chose well. It will not fire as fast as some rifles, but it will fire true if you treat it right." He loaded a round, movements practiced and smooth. First rule, never point the barrel at anything you do not wish to destroy. Second rule, assume it is always loaded, even when you know it is not. Third rule, when you shoot to stop the threat. Not to wound, not to warn. To stop, do you understand? Lucinda nodded, throat tight. This wasn't like the stories Papa used to tell, where guns were tools for hunting rabbits and protecting chickens from foxes. This was about killing men. About becoming someone who could kill men if necessary. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "Shoot someone, I mean." Nako looked at her, and his eyes were ancient despite his young face. "You can. When the moment comes, when someone threatens your mother or yourself, you will find that you can do things you never imagined. The body knows how to survive. The mind catches up later." He pointed to a dead tree across the canyon, maybe 40 yards distant. "That is your enemy. He wants to hurt you. He wants to take everything. Show him why that is a mistake." The first shot went wide, the recoil slamming into Lucinda's shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, huge and final. Her ears rang. Nako steadied her. "Again, this time breathe out before you pull the trigger. Let the air leave your body." The bullet follows the breath. The second shot hit low, kicking up dust at the base of the tree. The third shot hit bark, a solid thunk that sent splinters flying. By the 10th shot, Lucinda's shoulder was bruised and her arms ached, but she was hitting the tree more often than not. Nako nodded approval. "Good, you learn fast. Now we practice loading." In a fight, an empty rifle is just an expensive club. They spent 2 hours on that flat rock. Nako taught her to load quickly, to clear a jam, to maintain the weapon so it wouldn't fail when she needed it most. He taught her to shoot from different positions, standing and kneeling and prone. He taught her to judge distance and wind, and how fear made everything harder but not impossible. "Fear is good," he said. "Fear keeps you alive. It is only when fear becomes panic that you die. Remember that. Feel the fear, but do not become the fear." When the sun reached its high point, they stopped. Lucinda's hands shook from exertion and adrenaline. Nako handed her a water skin, and she drank deeply. The water was cool, flavored with something herbal she couldn't identify. "You did well," he said. "Better than I expected. You have steady hands and a good eye. With practice, you will be dangerous. I don't want to be dangerous. I just want to be safe. In this world, the two are the same thing." He looked out over the canyon, and something in his posture shifted, became heavier. "I was not always a warrior, you know. As a boy, I wanted to be a storyteller, like my grandfather. I wanted to learn all the old tales and pass them to my children." He smiled, but it was a sad smile, full of ghosts. "Then the soldiers came to our village. They did not care about stories or grandfathers or boys who wanted to be something other than warriors. So I became what was necessary, same as you are becoming now. They walked back toward the spring together, Lucinda leading the way and Nako following at a respectful distance. The paint horse trailed behind like a dog. Near the spring, Nako stopped. There is something you should know. My people, the Comanche, we are being pushed west. The army, the settlers, the hunters who kill the buffalo, they are taking everything. In a year, maybe less, there will be no Comanche in this territory. We will be gone, moved to reservations, or killed or scattered so far we forget we were ever a people. Lucinda felt something cold settle in her chest. What does that mean for us? It means I cannot watch over you forever. It means you must be ready to stand alone. He met her eyes. It also means that when I am gone, the men like those drifters will be bolder. They will know there are no Comanche to fear. They will come for your water and your land, and they will not leave empty-handed unless you make them. So, you're leaving. It came out flat, accusatory, though she didn't mean it that way. Not yet. Not until I must. But the time is coming, Lucy. I want you ready when it does. That night, Lucinda cleaned the rifle with oil and rags while Mama watched from the bed. He's teaching you to kill, Mama said. It wasn't a question. Lucinda nodded. He's teaching me to survive. There's a difference, is there? Mama's voice was thoughtful. Your papa used to say the same thing. Said survival and violence were different things, that a man could protect his family without becoming a killer. Then that horse kicked him and he died anyway, and I realized he was wrong. Violence doesn't care about your intentions. It just is, like weather. Are you angry? No, baby. I'm grateful. That Comanche, Nako, he's giving you what I can't, a chance. Mama coughed, a wet sound that made Lucinda's hands tighten on the rifle. The medicine had helped, but it hadn't cured. Nothing would cure. They both knew it, though neither said it aloud. Just promise me you'll only use that gun when you have no choice. Promise me you won't become hard. I promise, Mama. But even as she said it, Lucinda wondered if promises like that were possible to keep. The world had a way of making you hard whether you wanted to be or not. 2 days later, she was gathering mesquite pods near the southern boundary when she heard voices. Male voices, rough and familiar. She dropped to the ground behind a stand of prickly pear and peered through the spines. 3 men on foot, not the same ones from before, but cut from the same cloth. Drifters, outlaws, the human debris the war had scattered across Texas like seeds from a poisoned tree. They were examining the ground, following tracks. Springs around here somewhere, one of them said. Fella in Red Creek said it never runs dry, even in August. Worth money, water like that. What about the woman and kid? What about them? The first man laughed. One's dying, other's a child. They ain't gonna stop us. We take the water rights, file a claim in Red Creek, and in 6 months this land is ours legal-like. And if the Comanche comes back, then we shoot him same as we'd shoot any other savage. He ain't gonna protect them forever. Indians are leaving, everyone knows it. Army's got them on the run. Lucinda stayed frozen until the men moved on, heading east toward the creek. Then she ran back to the cabin, mesquite pods forgotten, breath coming in sharp gasps. Mama was asleep. Lucinda didn't wake her. Instead, she took the rifle and climbed onto the cabin roof, a low slope Papa had built gentle enough to walk on. From up there she could see for miles. The spring to the north, the creek to the east, the road to Red Creek winding south through the hills. She sat up there for 2 hours, rifle across her knees, watching the land like Nako watched it, looking for movement, for danger. For the moment when watching wouldn't be enough, and she'd have to become something she'd never been before. The sun moved across the sky. Hawks circled on thermals, hunting. And Lucinda understood finally what Nako had been trying to teach her. The world was full of hunters, and everything else was prey, and the only way to stop being prey was to grow teeth. That evening, Nako appeared at the cabin as the sun set. He didn't knock, just stood outside until Lucinda came to the door. "You saw them," he said. "Not a question. I saw them. They are planning, I know. I heard them talking. Good. Knowing means you can prepare." He held out a leather bundle. "For you." Inside were 4 arrows, Comanche made, the fletchings dyed red. Your rifle is good but loud. Arrows are silent. If you must kill, better to do it quietly. I don't have a bow. Then do not lose these. Hide them somewhere safe. When the time comes, you will know what to do with them." His eyes were serious, almost sad. "Things are moving faster than I hoped. The army is sweeping west, pushing my people hard. I may have to leave sooner than I planned." Lucinda felt panic rise in her throat. "How soon?" "Days, maybe. A week if we are lucky." He reached out and rested his hand briefly on her shoulder. "You are ready, Lucy. You do not feel ready, but you are. The rifle, the arrows, your courage, they are enough. They have to be enough. Don't go." The words came out small, childish, desperate. "Please, we need you. You need yourself. You need your mother's strength and your father's stubbornness, and the courage you have always had but did not know you had. I'm just the mirror showing you what was already there." He stepped back, and the distance between them felt like miles. "I will watch as long as I can. But when I go, you do not give up. You do not let them win. You fight, Lucy. You fight like your life depends on it. Because it does." He left then, disappearing into the gathering dark, and Lucinda stood in the doorway holding 4 arrows and feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Inside, Mama called her name. Lucinda hid the arrows under her pallet, put on a smile that felt like wearing someone else's face, and went to tend to the woman who'd given her life and was slowly, inevitably taking it back. The next morning the spring was fouled. Lucinda discovered it at dawn when she walked down with her bucket and found the water clouded, dark shapes floating on the surface. Dead animals, 2 rabbits and a squirrel, their bodies bloated and stinking. Someone had thrown them in during the night, poisoning the water, taking away the one thing that kept them alive. Lucinda stood at the edge of the spring and felt rage, pure and hot, flood through her body. She dragged the animals out with a stick, gagging at the smell. The water was ruined, maybe for days, maybe for weeks. She'd have to go to the creek instead, twice the distance and more exposed. Exactly what the drifters wanted. They were pushing, testing, seeing how far they could go before she broke. Behind her a horse snorted. Nako sat on the rise, closer than usual, his face carved from stone. "This is war now," he said quietly. "They have declared it. What will you do?" Lucinda looked at the fouled spring, at the dead animals that represented everything stolen from her, and she felt something shift inside her, something hard and sharp clicking into place like a rifle hammer being cocked. "I'll fight," she said. "I'll fight until I win or I die trying." Nako nodded slowly. "Good, then we plan. Tonight, when the moon is dark, they will come for the cabin. They think you are weak and alone. We will show them they are wrong. They spent the day preparing." Nako showed her how to set simple traps, branches bent and tied with rope that would snap across the path in the darkness. He showed her where to position herself for the best shot, how to use the cabin's corners for cover, how to reload without looking down. He was teaching her to be a warrior in the span of hours, knowledge that should take years, compressed into desperate minutes. Mama knew something was happening. She pulled Lucinda close after Nako left. "Whatever comes tonight, you remember something. You are my daughter. You are Thomas Whitfield's daughter. You come from strong people, stubborn people, people who don't quit. Whatever you have to do to survive, you do it. You hear me? You do it and you don't apologize and you don't feel guilty. You survive, Lucy. That's all that matters. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby. So much it hurts." Mama's eyes were bright, feverish again, but also clear. "Now give me that rifle. I may be dying, but I can still shoot." They waited as darkness fell. Lucinda at the door, Mama propped up in bed with the rifle across her lap, both of them listening to the night sounds, the crickets and the distant coyotes, and the wind moving through the grass. The moon was new, the sky black as ink, perfect conditions for men who wanted to do dark things. Lucinda's hands were steady on the Springfield. She loaded it herself, checked it twice, made sure everything was ready. The attack came at midnight. Not subtle, not quiet. 6 men on horseback, torches burning, riding straight for the cabin, like they owned the night and everything in it. The bearded man from before led them, shouting, "Come out, girl! Make this easy and nobody has to die." Lucinda didn't answer. She waited, heart hammering, until they were close enough. Then she fired. The shot took the lead horse in the chest, and the animal screamed and went down, throwing its rider hard. The night exploded into chaos. Men cursing, horses panicking, more shots fired wildly into the darkness. From somewhere behind the cabin, Nako's rifle barked twice, and 2 more men fell. The bearded man scrambled to his feet. "It's the Comanche!" "Circle around." But the traps Nako had set snapped in the darkness, ropes catching at throat height, and someone screamed. Lucinda reloaded, hands moving automatically the way Nako had taught her, and fired again. This time she aimed for the man with the scar, the one with the cruel eyes. She didn't know if she hit him, but he went down, and that was enough. The fight lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it ended, 3 men were dead or dying, 2 had fled into the darkness, and the bearded man knelt in the dirt with Nako's arrow through his shoulder, pinning him like an insect to a board. Lucinda walked out slowly, rifle still raised, and looked at him. "This is our land," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "Our water. You don't get to take it." The bearded man spat blood. "You're dead, girl. You and your savage friend. The law will come for this. Let them come." Lucinda lowered the rifle, but not all the way. "Let everybody come. They'll find the same thing you found. We don't quit. We don't run. We fight." Nako emerged from the shadows, his face painted for war, black and white and red, patterns that meant something in a language Lucinda didn't speak, but understood anyway. He pulled his arrow from the bearded man's shoulder without mercy, and the man screamed. "Go," Nako said. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them the Comanche still protect this place. Tell them mercy has sharp teeth." The bearded man stumbled away, and they let him go. He was a message now, not a threat. Lucinda watched him disappear into the darkness, then turned to Nako. "Thank you for everything. Do not thank me yet. This is not over. This is only the beginning." He looked toward the eastern horizon, where dawn was still hours away. "But tonight you won. You stood and fought, and you won. Remember this feeling. Hold it close. You will need it for what comes next." Inside the cabin, Mama had collapsed from the effort of staying upright with the rifle. Lucinda carried her back to bed, noting how light she'd become, how fragile. "We won, Mama," she whispered. "We fought and we won. I know, baby." "I heard." Mama's voice was barely audible. "I'm so proud of you. So proud." But her eyes were closing, and her breathing was shallow, and Lucinda knew with terrible certainty that winning the battle didn't mean winning the war. Some enemies couldn't be fought with rifles or arrows. Some enemies came from inside, slow and patient and inevitable. That night, she sat by Mama's bed and held her hand and watched the darkness outside slowly surrender to dawn. Nako was out there somewhere, keeping watch one more night. The spring would need cleaning. The bodies would need burying. And somewhere in Red Creek, men would be deciding what to do about the girl who'd killed 3 of their own, with a Comanche warrior at her back. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight they were alive. Tonight they had won. And in a world designed to break them, that was enough. It had to be enough. Morning brought consequences. 3 dead men lay in the dirt around the cabin, their blood already drawing flies in the October heat. Lucinda stood over them with a shovel that was too heavy and a task that was too grim for a 9-year-old girl. But nobody else was going to do it. Nako had disappeared before dawn, the way he always did, leaving only hoofprints and the memory of arrows flying through darkness. She was alone with the bodies and the terrible weight of what she'd done. She dragged the first man toward the rocky ground past the eastern hill, the same place Papa was buried. It took an hour to move him 30 yards, and by the end her arms screamed and her back felt like it might snap. The man was heavy in the way dead things are heavy, all slack weight and no cooperation. She didn't look at his face, couldn't afford to see him as human, as someone who maybe had a family or dreams or reasons for the things he'd done. He was just weight now, just something that needed to be put in the ground before it started to rot. The second man was worse because she recognized him. He'd been in Red Creek sometimes, working at the livery stable, always polite to her the few times they'd crossed paths. "Hello, miss," he'd say, tipping his hat. Now he was dead in her yard with a bullet hole in his chest, and she'd been the one holding the rifle. Her hands shook as she dragged him. Her stomach lurched. She had to stop twice to vomit in the grass, bringing up nothing but bile because she hadn't eaten since yesterday. By the time she got to the third man, the sun was high and merciless. Sweat soaked through her dress. Her palms were bleeding from blisters that had torn open. This man was the youngest, maybe 20, with red hair and freckles, and a face that looked surprised even in death. Lucinda sat down hard in the dirt beside him and let herself cry. Finally, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and terrible. She cried for the men who died. She cried for the girl she'd been 2 months ago, before water buckets and dying mothers and Comanche warriors. She cried because she was 9 years old and she'd killed people and nothing would ever be the same. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. A hand touched her shoulder. She jerked around, reaching for the rifle that wasn't there, and found Narco crouched beside her. His war paint was gone, washed away, and his face looked tired in a way she'd never seen before. "You cannot do this alone," he said quietly. "Come, I will help." Together they dragged the bodies to the rocky ground. Narco dug graves with practiced efficiency, his movements economical, while Lucinda watched and tried not to think about how many graves he must have dug in his life. They buried the men shallow, covered them with stones to keep the coyotes out, and spoke no words over them because neither knew what words would be appropriate for men who died trying to steal and kill a Depone. When it was finished, they walked back to the cabin in silence. Mama was awake, propped up on pillows, her face gray as old paper. She looked at Lucinda's bloody hands and dirt-stained dress, and tears still wet on her cheeks, and something in her expression crumbled. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "What have I done to you?" "You didn't do anything, Mama. They did. The men who came here, they did this. I should have sold this land when your papa died. Should have taken you somewhere safe, somewhere civilized. Instead, I held on out of pride and stubbornness, and now look at you. Look what you've had to become." Mama reached out with trembling hands and pulled Lucinda close. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it." Narco stood in the doorway watching. When Mama finally released Lucinda, he spoke. "There is no safe place. Civilization is just another word for organized cruelty. The girl, Lucy, she is strong. She will survive what comes. You taught her that. I taught her to bury bodies before she's old enough to understand what death means. Yes, and that is a gift, though it does not feel like one. In this world, the children who understand death are the ones who live long enough to become adults." He turned to leave, then paused. "The men who escaped will go to Red Creek. They will tell stories. The law will come, or more drifters, or both. You have maybe 2 days before the next test. Use them wisely." He left, and the cabin felt emptier than it ever had. Lucinda washed her hands in water from the bucket, scrubbing until the blood was gone, but the memory remained. Mama watched her with eyes that saw too much. "Do you hate me?" she asked. "For putting you through this?" "No, Mama, I could never hate you. You should. I'd understand if you did." Mama coughed, that wet, terrible sound that meant the medicine's effect was fading. "There's something I need to tell you, Lucy. Something I should have told you weeks ago, but I was too afraid, too proud, too stupid." She took a shaky breath. "The land deed, it's in my name. When I die, it goes to you. But you're a minor, which means the court will appoint a guardian. And there's only one person in Red Creek who'd want that position, Mrs. Johansson. Yes, she's been waiting for me to die so she can take you, take the land, take everything. The water rights alone are worth a fortune. She'll sell them to the highest bidder, probably that rancher Thornton, who owns half the territory already. You'll be stuck in her sister's house as an unpaid servant, and this place will be gone like it never existed." Lucinda felt cold, despite the afternoon heat. "What can we do?" "I don't know. The law isn't on our side. It never has been. Women and children don't get justice in Texas. We just get whatever men decide to give us." Mama's voice turned bitter. Your papa thought buying this land would make us safe, would give us something nobody could take away. He was wrong. Everything can be taken. The only question is how much you're willing to pay to keep it. I'll pay whatever it costs. That's what I'm afraid of." Mama closed her eyes. "You're too young to understand the price yet. But you will. You will." That evening, Lucinda sat on the cabin roof as the sun set, rifle across her knees, watching the land turn gold and amber in the dying light. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from Red Creek 8 miles south. The town felt like another world, a place with laws and churches and people who slept safe in their beds, never knowing or caring what happened to a dying woman and her daughter in a cabin surrounded by enemies. Footsteps below made her tense, but it was only Nako, leading his paint horse. He looked up at her. "You are keeping watch. Good. Always assume the enemy is coming even when they are not, especially when they are not. Nako, if they take this land, if the law gives it to Mrs. Johansson and I can't stop them, what happens then?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Then you adapt. You survive. You become someone new, someone they did not prepare for." He tied his horse and climbed onto the roof beside her, moving with the ease of someone who'd spent his life climbing things. "When I was young, my village was attacked by soldiers. They killed many, took the rest to a reservation. I watched them put my grandfather in chains. He was 80 years old, a holy man, a keeper of stories. They chained him like an animal and marched him west until he died in the desert, still in chains. That's horrible. Yes. But here is what they did not know. Before he died, my grandfather taught me every story, every song, every piece of wisdom the Comanche had gathered over centuries. He poured it all into me, like water into a vessel, and when he died, those things did not die with him. They lived in me. They still live." Nako looked at her with those black eyes that saw everything. "You are your mother's vessel, Lucy. Everything she is, everything your father was, it lives in you now. They can take the land, but they cannot take that. Not unless you let them." They sat in silence as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light, so bright out here away from town lamps that Lucinda felt she could reach up and touch it. "Do you believe in God?" she asked suddenly. "I believe in many gods. The earth god, the sky god, the gods of water and thunder and the hunt. I believe they exist because people need them to exist, because without gods there is only emptiness and chance, and that is too terrible to bear." He smiled slightly. "Does your God help you?" "I don't know. I pray sometimes, but I'm not sure anyone's listening. Then pray to the earth instead. The earth always listens. The earth remembers everything." The next morning brought visitors, but not the kind Lucinda expected. A wagon rolled up the path from Red Creek, driven by a woman in plain grey dress and bonnet. Behind her sat 3 children, ranging from maybe 6 to 12 years old, all dressed in similarly plain clothes. The woman had a kind face, weathered and strong, with grey streaking her dark hair. She pulled the wagon to a stop a respectful distance from the cabin and climbed down slowly. "Hello," she called out. "My name is Ruth Miller. I'm not here to cause trouble, just to talk, if you're willing." Lucinda stepped out with the rifle, not pointing it but not hiding it either. "Talk about what?" "About what happened 2 nights ago. About the men who died. About what's being said in town." Ruth moved closer, hands visible and empty. "May I approach?" Lucinda nodded. Up close, Ruth Miller had eyes that had seen hard things and decided to be kind anyway, the rarest sort of eyes. "I heard what those men tried to do," Ruth said quietly. "Heard they came to take your water and your land, and you defended yourself. I want you to know, not everyone in Red Creek thinks you're the villain here. Mrs. Johansson does. Constance Johansson is a bitter woman who thinks morality means controlling other people's lives. She doesn't speak for all of us." Ruth glanced toward the cabin. "Is your mother well enough to receive visitors?" "She's dying, I know. That's why I'm here." Ruth returned to the wagon and lifted out a basket covered with cloth. "I brought food. Real food, not charity. Payment, actually. Your spring water saved my youngest from fever last year when nothing else would. I owe you a debt. Let me pay it." Inside the cabin, Ruth examined Mama with gentle efficiency. She wasn't a doctor, but she'd birthed 6 children and nursed 3 through various ailments, and she knew sickness when she saw it. "The lung fever's deep," she said. "The medicines helped, but it's not enough. She needs rest, good food, clean air, and time. Mostly time." "How much time?" Lucinda asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. "Weeks, maybe. Could be months if she's strong and lucky. But not years." "I'm sorry, child. I wish I had better news." Ruth pulled food from the basket, real food, fresh bread and butter and smoked ham and dried apples. "You need to eat, both of you. Starving won't help anyone." They ate, and for a few minutes the cabin felt almost normal, almost like the home it had been when Papa was alive. Ruth's children waited outside, and through the window Lucinda could see them playing in the dirt, chasing each other around the wagon, normal children doing normal things. It made her chest ache with longing for a childhood she'd never really had. "There's going to be trouble," Ruth said, her voice low so the children wouldn't hear. "The sheriff's been talking about riding out here, asking questions about the dead men. And Constance Johansson's been spreading poison, saying you're being corrupted by that Comanche, saying you're dangerous and need to be removed for your own good." "I'm not being corrupted. Nako saved our lives. I believe you. But belief doesn't change the law, and the law in Red Creek answers to money and influence, both of which Constance has more of than you do." Ruth leaned forward. "Listen to me carefully. When the sheriff comes, and he will come, you tell him exactly what happened. 3 men attacked your home. You defended it. End of story. You don't mention the Comanche unless he asks directly. You certainly don't mention you've been receiving help from him for weeks. That'll just make things worse. Why are you helping us?" Ruth's eyes softened. "Because I remember being young and alone and thinking the whole world was against me. Someone helped me once when they didn't have to. I'm paying that forward." She stood, gathering the empty basket. "I'll come back when I can, bring more food. And Lucy, whatever happens, whatever they try to do, you remember something. You're not alone. You have friends. Not many, but some. And sometimes some is enough." After Ruth left, Mama pulled Lucinda close. She smelled like fever and medicine, and the lavender soap she used to use when they had money for such things. "There are good people," she whispered. "Not many, but some. Hold on to that. When everything else falls apart, hold on to that." The sheriff came the next afternoon, a heavy-set man named Garrett with a face like a sad hound and eyes that had seen too much meanness to be surprised by more. He rode up alone, hands visible on the reins, clearly not looking for a fight. Lucinda met him at the door with the rifle but pointed down. "Sheriff!" "Miss Whitfield, I'd like to ask you some questions about the incident 2 nights past. They attacked us. We defended ourselves. That's all there is to tell." Sheriff Garrett dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. "I need to hear it in detail. 3 men are dead, 2 more wounded. That's not something I can ignore, even if they were in the wrong." He glanced at the disturbed earth where the fighting had happened, the bloodstains already fading to rust. "May I come in?" Lucinda looked back at Mama, who nodded weakly. "All right, but you stay where I can see you." Inside, the sheriff removed his hat respectfully. He took in the sparse cabin, the dying woman in the bed, the child who'd clearly been living on the knife edge of survival. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm sorry to disturb you in your condition. Get on with it, Garrett. Ask your questions." So Lucinda told the story. 6 men on horseback, torches and threats, the attack that came at midnight. She described firing in self-defense, the chaos, the men who died. She told the truth mostly, only leaving out the parts about Nako's involvement. As far as the sheriff knew, she'd defended the cabin alone. "That's a lot of shooting for one little girl with an old Springfield," Garrett said when she finished. "I'm a good shot. Papa taught me. Your papa's been dead over a year. Some lessons stick." Lucinda met his eyes, daring him to call her a liar. Garrett studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "The men who survived, they're telling a different story. They say there was a Comanche warrior here, that he's been living on your property. That your mother's been harboring an enemy of the state. They're liars. Maybe, but 3 dead men and a Comanche sighting. That's enough to bring the army down on this place. You understand what that means? Soldiers, investigations, probably losing the land regardless of whether you're innocent or not. Mama struggled to sit up. What do you want, Garrett? Speak plain. I want the truth, but I'll settle for a version of truth that doesn't destroy what's left of your family. He leaned back in his chair. Here's what I'm thinking. I write in my report that Miss Lucinda here defended the cabin alone. Remarkable shooting for her age, but not impossible given the circumstances. The men who attacked were known troublemakers. No great loss to society. Case closed, everyone moves on. And the Comanche? What Comanche? Far as I'm concerned, there's been no Indian activity in this area for months. The survivors are confused, probably saw shadows and moonlight, and their own guilt made it into something it wasn't. Garrett put his hat back on. But here's the condition. Whatever arrangement you've got with whoever might be out there in those hills, it ends now. No more gifts, no more watching, no more anything. The army's pushing west hard, and any Comanche still in this territory by winter will be hunted down and killed or shipped to a reservation. I can't protect you if you're actively helping them. He saved our lives, and now you need to save his by making him leave. You understand? Garrett stood, moved toward the door. I'm doing you a kindness here more than most would. Don't make me regret it. After the sheriff left, Lucinda sat on the floor and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down. Save Nako by driving him away, or keep him close and watch him die when the army came. Neither option was bearable, but one of them was necessary. Outside, the sun continued its arc across the sky, indifferent to human suffering, and somewhere in the hills, a Comanche warrior sat on a paint horse, unaware that the time he'd predicted was arriving faster than either of them had hoped. That night she found Nako at the flat rock where he'd taught her to shoot. He was sitting cross-legged, facing west, singing something in Comanche that sounded like prayer or grief or both. She climbed up beside him and waited until the song ended. The sheriff came, she said. He knows about you, I know. I watched from the hills. He said you have to leave. Said the army's coming and anyone still here will be killed or taken. Nako nodded slowly. Yes, the end has been coming for a long time. We all knew it. We just pretended we didn't. He looked at her, and in the moonlight his face was ancient, carved from stone and sorrow. I will leave tomorrow at dawn. I will go west and find what is left of my people, and perhaps we will survive together, or perhaps we will die together. Either way, it will be as it was meant to be. I don't want you to go, I know, but wanting and having are different things. You taught me that, Lucy, though you did not know you were teaching. He reached into his pouch and pulled out something small and pale, a piece of carved bone shaped like a bird in flight. This was my daughter's. She carried it everywhere, said it would help her fly when she was old enough. After she died, I could not look at it without pain. But now I give it to you, and the pain is less. Maybe that is what healing means. Not forgetting, but learning to carry the weight without being crushed. Lucinda took the carved bird, felt its smoothness, the love that had shaped it. I'll keep it safe. I promise. I know you will. Just as you will keep yourself safe, and your mother, and this land that has cost so much blood. Nako stood, tall against the stars. You are a warrior now, Lucy. Not because you wanted to be, but because the world demanded it. That is the hardest kind of warrior to be, but also the strongest because you fight not for glory or conquest, but for love. And love makes even the smallest person dangerous. They sat together until the moon set and the stars wheeled overhead, and dawn began its slow approach. They didn't talk much. Some goodbyes were too big for words. When the first grey light touched the eastern horizon, Nako stood and walked to his horse. He mounted in one smooth motion, then looked back at Lucinda one final time. Remember, he said, you are not alone. You carry your mother's strength, your father's courage, and the pieces of everyone who ever helped you. We are all still with you, even when you cannot see us. He raised his hand, palm out, the gesture he'd made that first morning. Goodbye, Lucy Whitfield. May the earth remember you kindly. Goodbye. Nako, may you find your people." Then he turned his paint horse west and rode toward the rising sun, and Lucinda watched him go until he was just a speck on the horizon. Then nothing at all, disappeared into the vast emptiness of Texas, like water into sand. She sat on the flat rock and held the carved bird and cried, not the desperate sobs of before, but something quieter, deeper. The tears of someone who'd lost something precious, but gained something more valuable in return. She walked back to the cabin as the sun climbed higher. Mama was awake, could somehow sense what had happened. "He's gone, isn't he?" "Yes, Mama, he's gone." "Then we're truly alone now." Lucinda shook her head. "No, we're not alone. We're just learning to stand without help. There's a difference." She picked up the water bucket, that old iron weight that had started everything. "I'm going to the spring. We need water." "Lucy, wait. I need to tell you something, in case I don't get another chance." Mama's voice was urgent, almost frantic. "Under the floorboard by the hearth there's a box. Inside is every dollar I've saved since your papa died. It's not much, maybe $30, but it's yours. If something happens to me, if they try to take you, you use that money. You run. You go to San Antonio, find work, make a new life. Don't let them trap you here." "I'm not running, Mama. I'm not leaving you, and I'm not leaving this land. It's ours. Papa died for it, you're dying for it, and I'll be damned if I just hand it over to people who don't deserve it." Mama smiled through her tears. "When did you get so fierce?" "I learned from the best." Lucinda picked up the bucket and walked to the door. Outside, the morning was bright and clean, washed clear by the night's cold. The spring waited, patient and eternal, and somewhere in the western distance, a Comanche warrior rode toward an uncertain future, carrying the ghost of a girl who'd reminded him that mercy still existed in a world designed to destroy it. She filled her bucket with cold, clear water and carried it home. The weight hadn't changed, but she had. And somehow that made all the difference. November arrived with unexpected rain, 3 days of steady downpour that turned the earth soft and filled the spring to overflowing. Lucinda stood in the doorway, watching water pour from the sky like a blessing or a curse. She couldn't decide which. The cabin roof leaked in 2 new places, and she'd set out tin cups to catch the drips, a rhythm of plink, plink, plink that marked the hours. Mama slept more than she woke now, each breath a small victory, each morning a surprise that she'd survived the night. The rain brought Ruth Miller again, her wagon struggling through mud that sucked at the wheels like hungry mouths. She brought more food, blankets that smelled of cedar and lavender, and news from Red Creek that made Lucinda's stomach clench. "Constance Johansson's filed papers with the territorial court," Ruth said, shaking water from her shawl. "Claiming your mother's too ill to care for you properly, that you need a proper Christian guardian. The hearing's set for 2 weeks from now. Can she do that?" "She's doing it. Whether it'll work depends on the judge, and Judge Harrison owes Constance's brother money, so the odds aren't in your favor." Ruth squeezed Lucinda's shoulder. "But here's the thing. The law requires someone to speak for you at the hearing. An advocate. Usually it'd be family. But seeing as you don't have any, the court will appoint someone unless you choose first." "Who would I choose?" Ruth smiled, tired but genuine. "You choose me if you're willing. I've been talking to some of the other women in town, the ones who remember what it's like to be powerless. We've put together something like a coalition, I suppose you'd call it. We can't promise victory, but we can promise you won't face this alone." Over the next week, the cabin became something it had never been before, a gathering place. Women came from Red Creek and the surrounding farms. Women whose names Lucinda barely knew, but whose faces all carried the same story. Hard lives made harder by men and laws, and a world that measured their worth in silence and submission. They brought skills and knowledge Mama had been too proud or too isolated to ask for. Mrs. Chen, whose husband ran the general store, knew herbal remedies that eased Mama's coughing. Young Zara Briggs, barely 17 and already widowed, knew how to repair the roof properly. Old Anna Kowalski, who spoke broken English but perfect kindness, brought a goat that gave milk rich and sweet. They worked without being asked, these women, patching and cleaning and reinforcing, turning the cabin from a place where people waited to die into a place where they might actually live. And while they worked, they talked. Stories poured out, tales of husbands who drank or hit or simply disappeared, of children lost to fever or childbirth gone wrong, of land stolen and dreams deferred and small victories earned through sheer stubborn refusal to quit. Lucinda listened and learned that her story wasn't unique, just louder than most, and that survival was always a collective effort even when it looked solitary. Mama had good days scattered among the bad ones. On a Thursday morning, when the rain finally stopped and weak sunlight filtered through breaking clouds, she sat up without help and asked for real food, not broth, but actual food. Lucinda scrambled eggs from the chickens Ruth had brought, mixed them with wild onions and a precious pinch of salt, and watched Mama eat with an appetite that had been missing for months. "I want to see the spring," Mama said after she'd eaten. "One more time before the hearing. Will you take me?" They walked slowly, Mama leaning heavy on Lucinda's shoulder, her breathing labored but determined. The spring looked different after the rain, fuller and clearer, reflecting the sky like polished silver. Mama knelt at the edge with difficulty and dipped her hands in the cold water, brought them to her face, let the wetness run down her cheeks mixing with tears. She didn't bother hiding. "Your papa and I stood here the day we bought this land," she said quietly. "He said this water meant we'd never go thirsty, that it was worth more than gold. I thought he was being romantic. Turns out he was just being right. We're going to keep it, Mama. Whatever happens at the hearing, we're going to keep it. I hope so, baby. But if we don't, if they take it despite everything, you remember that land is just earth and water. What matters is what you carry inside, that they can't take unless you let them." The night before the hearing, Lucinda couldn't sleep. She sat on the cabin roof, under a sky so clear the stars looked close enough to touch, and she thought about Nako somewhere out west, about Papa in his grave, about the carved bone bird she kept in her pocket as a reminder that loss and love were the same thing wearing different faces. Below, Mama coughed, the sound wet and terrible, and Lucinda knew with certainty that time was running out faster than any of them wanted to admit. Morning came grey and cold. Ruth arrived with her wagon and her 3 children, plus 2 other women, Mrs. Chen and Sarah Briggs, all dressed in their Sunday best, armor made of respectability. They helped Mama into the wagon, cushioning her with blankets, and then they rolled toward Red Creek, 8 miles that felt like 80. Lucinda wore her only good dress, the blue one Mama had made 2 years ago that was too short now, but still cleaner than anything else she owned. In her pocket, the carved bird pressed against her leg, a small, hard reminder of courage. Red Creek was bigger than Lucinda remembered, or maybe she'd just gotten smaller. The main street bustled with activity, wagons and horses and people who looked at them with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. The courthouse was a 2-story building of whitewashed wood with a bell tower that seemed designed to make people feel insignificant. Inside, the courtroom smelled of tobacco and old paper, and the particular staleness of a place where justice was measured in property and precedent rather than mercy. Judge Harrison was a lean man with silver hair and eyes like chips of flint. He sat behind a massive oak desk that elevated him above everyone else, literally and figuratively looking down on the proceedings. Constance Johansson sat at the plaintiff's table with her lawyer, a slick man named Pemberton, who wore his expensive suit like a weapon. On the other side, Ruth and the coalition women arranged themselves around Mama's chair, a human shield of solidarity. The hearing began with Pemberton laying out his case. He painted a picture of neglect and danger, a dying woman unable to care for herself, let alone a child, a property overrun with violence and chaos, a girl growing wild without proper guidance or education. He made it sound reasonable, even charitable, that Mrs. Johansson would step in to provide structure and moral instruction. He carefully avoided mentioning the water rights or the land value, instead focusing on Christian duty and community responsibility. Then Ruth stood to speak. She wasn't a lawyer, didn't have fancy words or legal training, but she had something Pemberton lacked, truth delivered without varnish. She described finding Lucinda caring for her mother with a devotion most adults couldn't muster, maintaining a household against impossible odds, defending her home when grown men came to take it. She called witness after witness, women who testified to Mama's strength and Lucinda's character, who spoke of community support and shared responsibility. Mrs. Chen described the herbal treatments helping Mama recover. Sarah Briggs detailed the repairs made to the cabin. Anna Kowalski, through halting English, spoke about the goat and the chickens and how the property was thriving, not failing. Judge Harrison listened with an expression that gave nothing away. When Ruth finished, he turned to Lucinda. Young lady approached the bench. His voice was neither kind nor cruel, just flat as paper. Lucinda walked forward, her legs shaking but her back straight. Do you understand what's happening here today? Yes, sir. Mrs. Johansson wants to take me from my mama and steal our land. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Pemberton shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is inflammatory and inappropriate. It's also the truth, Lucinda said before the judge could respond. My mom is sick, but she's not dying fast enough for some people's plans. They want the spring. They want the water rights. I'm just the excuse they're using to get it. Judge Harrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Bold words from a child. Can you prove any of this? Can they prove my mama's unfit? She feeds me, clothes me, teaches me right from wrong. She's sick, yes, but sickness isn't a crime. And I'm not neglected. I'm learning to be strong, same as any frontier child has to learn. That's not neglect, that's survival. The judge leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. For a long moment the courtroom was silent, except for the ticking of a large clock on the wall, measuring seconds that felt like hours. Then Harrison spoke. Mrs. Johansson, approach. Constance walked forward, her face composed but her eyes sharp with calculation. Why do you want custody of this child? To provide her with proper care and moral guidance, Your Honor. The situation she's living in is untenable. And the property. What happens to it if custody is granted to you? Constance hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. I suppose it would be managed by the court until the child comes of age. Managed meaning sold. Likely to pay for her upkeep in your sister's household? If necessary, yes. And who would buy it? Who's expressed interest in that particular property? Another hesitation. I believe Mr. Thornton has mentioned it could be useful for his cattle operation. Mr. Thornton, who happens to be your business partner in the Red Creek Water Collective. It wasn't a question. Judge Harrison looked at Pemberton. Counselor, did you disclose this financial relationship in your filings? Pemberton's smooth facade cracked. It's not relevant to the welfare question, Your Honor. I'll decide what's relevant in my courtroom. Harrison turned back to Constance. You've come before me with what appears to be a legitimate welfare concern. But underneath, it's just land speculation, dressed up as charity. I've seen this maneuver before, Mrs. Johansson. Usually I allow it because the law technically permits it. But today I'm disinclined. Hope flared in Lucinda's chest, bright and painful. Harrison continued, however, I'm also troubled by the genuine welfare questions. A terminally ill woman caring for a minor child on a remote property that's seen recent violence. These are legitimate concerns regardless of your motivations. He looked at Mama, really looked at her, seeing the fever-bright eyes and wasted frame. Mrs. Whitfield, how long do the doctors give you? Mama stood with effort, Ruth supporting her elbow. Not long enough, Your Honor, but long enough to see my daughter established with people who'll care for her as family, not as property. And who would these people be? Ruth stepped forward. My family, Your Honor. We've offered to take Lucy in, not as a servant, but as a daughter. She'd continue her education, learn useful skills, and maintain connection to her mother's property until she's old enough to claim it properly. And the property itself. Who manages it in the interim? A trust, Your Honor, Ruth said. She pulled out papers clearly prepared for this moment. Signed by myself and 5 other women from the community. We'd maintain the property, manage the water rights, and ensure the proceeds benefit Lucy's upkeep and education. Everything documented, everything legal. No opportunities for theft or misappropriation. Judge Harrison examined the papers with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to spot forgeries and loopholes. Minutes passed. The clock ticked. Constance Johansson's face grew progressively paler as she realized her plan was unraveling. Finally, Harrison set the papers down. This is highly irregular. Women's trusts are rare and often challenged, but not illegal, Ruth said firmly. And certainly more ethical than what's being proposed by the plaintiff. The judge was silent for another long moment. Then he picked up his gavel. In the matter of custody for minor child Lucinda Whitfield, I find that while the mother's illness is serious, there exists sufficient community support to ensure the child's welfare. Custody remains with Mary Whitfield, with Ruth Miller designated as guardian in the event of Mrs. Whitfield's incapacity. The property trust is approved pending proper documentation and registration. Petition denied. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like thunder. The courtroom erupted. Constance Johansson's face twisted with rage. Pemberton immediately began protesting, citing precedents and procedures. But Harrison was unmoved. This hearing is concluded. Mrs. Johansson, I'd suggest you be more careful about your charitable motivations in the future. This court sees through pretense, even when wrapped in scripture. He stood, gathering his papers. Good luck to you all. You'll need it. Outside the courthouse, the coalition women surrounded Lucinda and Mama, crying and laughing and holding each other like they'd won a war instead of just one battle. Mama collapsed into Ruth's arms, sobbing with relief so profound it shook her whole body. Lucinda stood in the center of it all, feeling numb and overwhelmed and grateful in ways she had no words for. They'd won. Against odds and law and money and power, they'd actually won. The ride home felt different, lighter somehow, despite Mama's obvious exhaustion. Ruth talked about the trust, about how they'd need to formalize everything with proper lawyers, about planting schedules and water management, and a dozen practical things that made the future feel real instead of theoretical. The other women chattered about their own plans, their own small rebellions against the world that wanted them silent and compliant. And Lucinda listened and thought about Narco, hoping he could somehow know that the little girl he'd protected had learned to protect herself. Back at the cabin, they helped Mama into bed. She was fading fast, the exertion of the hearing taking a toll her weakened body couldn't afford. But her eyes were bright when she looked at Lucinda. We did it, baby. We actually did it. You did it, Mama. You held on long enough. No, you did it. You and all those women who decided enough was enough. Mama's hand found Lucinda's, squeezed with what little strength remained. I can rest now. I can finally rest. Don't talk like that. You're going to recover. The medicine's working. Lucy. Mama's voice was gentle but firm. We both know that's not true. The medicine bought us time, and we used that time well. But time always runs out eventually. That's not failure. That's just life. Mama lasted another week. 7 days of slow fading, of moments of clarity followed by long stretches of sleep. Ruth came daily, teaching Lucinda the skills she'd need, helping with the care that dying required. The coalition women rotated through, never leaving them alone, ensuring Mama's final days were filled with friendship and dignity. On the last day, Mama woke in the afternoon when golden light slanted through the window and her eyes were clear as they'd ever been. Tell me about the spring, she said. Tell me what it looks like today. So Lucinda described it. The water clear and cold, the way sunlight caught the surface and made it sparkle, the frogs that had returned with the rain, the birds that came to drink at dawn. She described it all in detail, painting a picture with words, and Mama listened with a smile on her lips. It's beautiful, she whispered. Your papa was right. Water is worth more than gold. Then she closed her eyes, and her breathing grew slow and steady. And by the time the sun set, she was gone. They buried her next to Papa, on the rocky ground where the mesquite grew thick. Half the town came, not the powerful or wealthy, but the workers and farmers and women who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep fighting anyway. Ruth spoke words about strength and grace. Mrs. Chen sang something in Chinese that sounded like birds calling. And Lucinda stood at the grave holding the carved bone bird and understanding finally what Nako had meant about carrying weight without being crushed. The weeks after were hard in ways Lucinda hadn't anticipated. Not the work, she was used to work, but the silence. The cabin felt enormous and empty, without Mama's presence, without her coughing or her voice or even her sleeping breath. Lucinda moved through the days mechanically, fetching water, tending the goat, maintaining the property that was hers now, legally and completely. Ruth checked on her daily, often bringing her children to fill the silence with noise and life. The trust was formalized, papers signed and filed, ensuring nobody could take what they'd fought so hard to keep. On a morning in late November, Lucinda walked to the spring and found something waiting. A single eagle feather, thrust into the ground beside the water, standing upright like a marker. She knew immediately who'd left it, though she'd thought him long gone. Nako had come back just for a moment, just long enough to leave a message. The eagle was sacred to the Comanche, a symbol of courage and vision. It meant he'd heard somehow about Mama's death, about the hearing, about everything. It meant he was proud. She pulled the feather from the earth and added it to her collection of treasures, the carved bird and the button Papa had made, and now this, pieces of everyone who'd shaped her. Then she filled her bucket, the old iron weight that had started everything, and carried it home. Her arms were stronger now. Her back could take the burden, and the cabin, when she entered it, felt less empty, because she understood finally that home wasn't a place. It was a choice. The choice to keep going when stopping would be easier. The choice to fight when surrender would be kinder. The choice to believe that tomorrow might be better than today, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. Spring came eventually, as it always does. The land turned green, wildflowers carpeting the hills in colors that seemed impossible after the winter's gray. Lucinda planted a garden, using seeds Ruth provided and techniques the coalition women taught. She learned to manage the water rights, to negotiate with ranchers who needed access to the spring, to drive hard bargains that favored her while remaining fair. She was 12 now, nearly 13, and people in Red Creek had stopped seeing her as a child. They saw her as the girl who'd killed men defending her home, who'd faced down the court and won, who'd survived things that broke adults and come out harder but not cruel. Ruth's family officially adopted her that summer, though Lucinda spent most of her time at the cabin, unwilling to abandon the land that had cost so much blood and tears. She went to school when she could, learning reading and arithmetic and history from books that told lies about brave settlers taming savage wilderness. She didn't correct the lies out loud, but she remembered the truth, remembered Nako and his daughter and the way Mercy could wear war paint. On her 13th birthday, she walked to the flat rock where Nako had taught her to shoot. The Springfield rifle was strapped across her back, comfortable now as an old friend. She sat where they'd sat together and looked west toward the horizon where he'd disappeared. "I'm okay," she said aloud to the wind, to the earth, to whoever might be listening. "I'm strong and I'm safe and I'm keeping my promises. I hope you are too. I hope you found your people. I hope you're teaching someone else to carry weight without being crushed." The wind didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Some things were understood without words. Years passed as they do. Lucinda grew into a woman who looked like Mama, but carried Papa's stubbornness and Nako's warrior heart. She never married, though suitors came calling, attracted by the water rights and the strength they saw in her eyes. She didn't need a husband. She had the coalition women, her found family, and together they built something new in Red Creek, a community where women owned property and made decisions, and weren't ashamed of either. It started small, just the trust, but it grew into businesses and schools and eventually political power. Quiet but real, the cabin stood for decades, growing and changing as Lucinda added rooms and improvements. The spring never ran dry, providing water for her livestock and crops, and eventually for the whole territory as drought and climate changed the land. She charged fair rates, remembering what it felt like to be desperate, but she never gave it away free because free things weren't valued and this water had been earned in blood. She kept the treasures always, the carved bone bird, the button, the eagle feather. They sat on a shelf above the hearth, and sometimes when the wind blew from the west, she'd touch them and remember everyone who'd helped her become who she was. Mama, who'd taught her that love meant holding on. Papa, who'd believed water was worth more than gold. Nago, who'd shown her that enemies could become family, and that mercy was the bravest choice. Ruth and all the women who'd proved that strength came from community, not isolation. On a spring morning, 40 years after that first walk to the spring, with an iron bucket too heavy for her hands, an old woman named Lucinda stood at the water's edge and watched the sunrise paint the sky gold and amber. Her hair was white now, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but her eyes were still sharp and her back was still straight. Behind her, the cabin had become a house, and beyond that, a town had grown up around the spring. A town where women owned half the businesses and made half the laws, and nobody thought it strange anymore. She thought about the girl she'd been, 9 years old and terrified, and certain she'd die alone. She thought about all the moments when giving up would have been easier than fighting. She thought about the people who'd saved her and the people she'd saved in return. The way survival was always a collective effort, even when it looked solitary. And she understood, finally, completely what her life had meant. Not the land or the water or the money, though those mattered. What mattered was the proof that even the smallest person could change the world if they refused to quit. Refused to surrender, refused to believe that cruelty was inevitable or that kindness was weakness. The morning was cold but not cruel. The water was clear and cold, same as it had always been. And somewhere in the western distance, in a place beyond maps or memory, a Comanche warrior's spirit rode a paint horse through grasslands that existed only in stories now. And he smiled because he knew somehow that the little girl he'd saved had grown into exactly who she was meant to be. Strong and stubborn and fierce and kind, a warrior who fought with love instead of hate. And that was the most dangerous kind of warrior there was. She filled a cup with spring water and drank deeply, tasting earth and stone and the metallic tang of survival. Then she walked back toward the house where breakfast waited and another day beckoned, and she thought about Mama's words from so long ago. Land is just earth and water, but what you carry inside that they can never take. She'd carried it all these years, the love and loss and lessons, and she'd pass it forward to the next generation who'd need it just as desperately. Because the world was still hard, still cruel, still designed to break the vulnerable. But it hadn't broken her. It never would. And that was enough. That was everything. That was the story worth telling. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.